So I asked this question to Commissioner Mapp, so I wanted to ask you the same question because I was very interested in his response. How do you feel right now about the state of Portland overall?
We are facing a lot of challenges right now. It is clear that the four pandemics that we've experienced over the last 18 months have had an economically devastating impact on so many people in our community. And you put on top of that the increase in gun violence. It is just it's got to be just overwhelming for most community members. And I know for me, it's just every single day, it's like we're spending all day trying to address the variety of crises that our community is experiencing. But I will also say that, our 18-month plus pandemic, wildfires, weather emergencies, the huge increase in our houseless population, and a huge increase that's coming because of the eviction moratorium ending in December. We need big ideas and big plans about how we're going to help our community come back, rebound, and we will. We will. I've been inspired, honestly, over the last 18 months by regular Portlanders in every corner of the city, really stepping up, whether it's garbage pickup, whether it's feeding houseless camps, whether it's, checking on elderly neighbors. People have been the self-care and the community care that has come out of these tragedies that we've experienced is something I need us to all tap into as we rebuild. And the reality is, it's going to be a couple of years. It's not going to happen overnight. We're not just going to remove graffiti and everything goes back to normal. We have a lot of work to do, but I have so much confidence that Portlanders are ready to do the hard work. They just need their leaders to tell them how they can be part of the solution.
You mentioned the four pandemics. Can you clarify what those are?
Oh yeah, well, we started with the worldwide health pandemic, COVID-19,
Familiar with that
right?
one.
And then we had wildfires. Then we had severe weather. We had the severe snowstorm. We had the severe heat wave, all within the last year. And then of course we had the racial justice movement that's went on all 6 months plus last year, right? So 4 or 5 crises, right? And none of them are at the end of their cycle.
Yeah, that's a really good point. When you talk about those natural disasters, especially, it does feel like it's just one thing after another.
And it's not going to get better until we radically change how we're impacting the climate.
So when we talk about gun violence, I know the last time you and I had talked, you were really clear that you think the role of police should be investigative, not preventative. Listening to the mayor on Friday, he talked a lot about the focused intervention team, growing that, recruiting for that. Talk to me a little bit about how you feel about FIT right now, and if you think your colleagues, other city leaders, are on the right track with that.
Well, let me say that the devil will be in the details about whether or not this new emergent team will have any impact on gun violence. We know that actually police officers aren't who has the impact. It's really the community. When the community trusts and respect police, they become partners in solving crime in our community. Um, I have deep concerns because honestly, the clearance rate that the previous reiteration of the gun involvement, the gang enforcement team, did not have really good outcomes. For me, there's some real basic questions that I would love to have the police bureau answer weekly. And those questions are really around how many interactions have you had in the last week related to gun violence? How many guns did you get off the street? What's the demographic breakdown of those individuals involved? Um, and how many cases are now headed to the DA for prosecution, right? The public needs to know that because the calls I get in my office is that the police are just unresponsive. We don't know. I think the police say they can't help, right? They're too busy. They're too understaffed. They can't help. I've asked Mike Myers, who is the director of our public safety coordinated effort, to really look into how does a police officer spend their day? What's the average day like for a Portland police officer? I've said to Chief LaBelle many times, Chief, why are you waiting for volunteers for this fit team? Why are you not identifying your best officers and assigning them to be part of the fit team? The community needs to know that we are doing constitutional policing. And what we know today is that the Portland Police Bureau has not been responsive to the DOJ, has not been responsive to the city council, has not been responsive to the police commissioner. And so, in my mind, I just don't know enough information other than every press release says we don't have enough people.
So you're not necessarily against FIT, but you think there needs to be some answers from the police department, from the police bureau, and also some oversight, it sounds
There
like.
has to be some transparency, right?
Mhm.
And not the stuff that the police want to share with people, which is why they had them sign confidentiality agreements. But it's the information the public needs to know. Is Portland police getting guns off the street? I read an article a few weeks back where the sheriff's got 400 guns off the street and one bus. Made me think, I wonder how many guns Portland police have gotten off the street since we've been having this insane amount of gun violence. And we know that the violence is domestic violence, suicide is up a lot. 911 calls now, right? We know that children are starting back to school, so child abuse reports are going to be back up again. Through the entire pandemic, domestic violence was up anywhere from 30% to 400% in any given week. And it is just starting to go down a bit. But so we have not been able to say we have gun violence. It's true, but we have a lot of gun violence, right?
Mhm.
And so we do need better transparency, better data, and just better communication with the public about what are you doing? What are you doing today, right? With what you have, because every city bureau has faced cuts, and every city bureau has had to deal with the 4 or 5 crises that we've dealt with, starting with the pandemic.
I know Mingus Maps and then also the mayor have talked about growing the police force again. Do you want to see more officers return to the force, or do you want to see those numbers grow?
I want Portland Police Bureau to be a place that people want to be employed. It is not that today. Today, we have a dysfunctional culture that, as the DOJ has said, hasn't even acknowledged the significance of the mandate that was required from last year's social justice movement. It's as if the leadership has just acquiesced responsibility. And so my fear is if we even were able to recruit good officers today, the only way they'd get off probation would be to actually absorb the culture that exists today. Do we need more police? I know we need a different kind of police. We need a police that's going to partner with the community. Today, less than 15% of Portland police officers live in the city of Portland. Uh, so they're not part of the community, they come in to police the community. Um, I'm looking forward to once we continue the transformation, we're going to do the truth and reconciliation process. We're going to start that application process in the fall. And I'm really looking forward to that work because honestly, that work will lead to us working with the community to decide how do we want to be policed? Who are the police officers that we want to recruit into Portland, right? I look forward to us going to recruit police officers from high schools, starting them on summer employment programs so that they grow with us and they're part of the community. Um, we have to take a different approach that is actually more collaborative and more of a partnership. We are suffering a severe public health crisis right now with gun violence. And as Dr. John Jay has said from Boston University, who I brought out here earlier, and Mike Myers brought him back out recently, and now the Office of Community Safety has him under contract to help us think about how do we use all the city bureaus to help reduce violence in our community, right? Does that mean tree canopy in some areas? Does that mean actually putting something on a vacant lot so that it's welcoming? Does that mean having streets where it's normal for community members to gather in certain places. And none of this is the short-term solution that I know the community is desperate for, but all of it leads us to addressing the issues as they are today, right? And taking a very systemic and data-driven approach to solving this crisis, right? Not
There
one
are any
thing.
short-term solutions, and do you think council has acted with enough urgency on gun violence?
I think that, well, let me just say that it's always hard to get money out of the door at the city. It shocks me how long it takes to hire employees, how long it takes to get checks out the door. I mean, it makes no sense to me. And I guess in a government of 5,000 plus employees, it's probably as quick as we could possibly make it happen. But it is frustrating because honestly, when we made that vote, my expectation is we get that money out the door as quickly as possible, right?
You're talking about
But
6 million, right? I just want to make sure
the
we're
6 million,
okay.
yes.
Got it, yes.
But let me say that I also support Mike Myers slowing down because as I started asking about how do we make these decisions, right? It's like all of a sudden we got these proposals, but how do we make these decisions? When Mike Myers started talking to the organizations who had some concerns about how they were being used and if they would actually have some safety protocols put in place because they're being asked to go into really dangerous areas with the police and
Mhm.
just accompanying the police makes some people really unsafe in our community. So it was important conversations to have and important standards to put in place. I wish we could have done it sooner, but I know that all the folks that have been involved have been working really hard to try to get those dollars out the door. My understanding is they went out the door last month.
Is there anything else you want to see done in the short term aside from the 6 million going to community groups?
Well, I have some ideas about some other things that we should be working with the community to put in place, like buyback programs have always been very successful. And what I know from my conversations with Chief LaBelle is guns gets in the hands of people where many times because the gun was stored inappropriately. And so the more we can do to help educate the public about good gun storage will minimize people getting access to guns that really shouldn't have access to it. When I talk to the police and they say, "Oh, people put it in their glove compartment or in their trunk, and then the car's stolen, and all of a sudden now the gun's out there in the street being passed from hands to hands," right? So, the more we can do to help educate the public about responsible gun ownership. And then possibly putting together in partnership with community-based organizations, some buyback programs that will help people get rid of guns that they already know they don't want in their house.
Is there anything else you want to add on gun violence before I ask you about August 22nd response? I want to make sure I'm not missing anything. I know when we met, it was at the Portland Street Response press conference. So I don't know if you want to touch
That's
on
right.
that, if there's anything else that I'm missing.
Well, I think Portland Street Response is part of the a part of the solution to police not being responsive to 911 calls, right? We should make sure that Portland Street Response is rolled out citywide as it originally was intended. And that will help to mitigate some of the calls that police get. We also, I'm working with the mayor's office around expanding the 311 center, a call center that we have. Right now, that center operates Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, which is pretty useless when there's a weather emergency or some other emergency that
Yeah,
you
we
have
definitely
to
saw that
respond.
during the heat wave.
Yes.
Yeah, I remember that.
And so we're looking at how do we roll that out faster to make it a 24-hour a day, 7-day a week operation. So there are ways that we can invest our limited city resources to take the pressure off of 911 while also changing how police respond. I think right now, if you take police at their word that they have limited individuals, then they should only be responding to 911 calls and they should be actually doing the detective work to solve those crimes, right? If you think about the other things that they do, like escorting, working with Montgomery County sheriffs for evictions, We shouldn't be doing that if, in fact, we're shorthanded. We have to look at all the things that we do because we want to be good partners and say, look, if we really are in a severe crisis, then we have to focus on what we do right now, right? Not what we've always done, but we've got to focus on being a first responder and a first responder that responds to 911 in a prompt manner. And
I
then,
guess
of course,
the
the council has the obligation to redirect many of those calls that they can.
I guess the only other thing I'd ask you in reference to gun violence is, I mean, I know you have a really big job and you've got to feel a lot of responsibility. How are you feeling personally about it all right now? I know you see the reports, I know you talk to people out there.
Well, I let me tell you, I fear the fear that our community is feeling. You cannot walk the street anywhere in the city of Portland and not have this sense of fear right now. And but I think the fear is because people don't know where we're headed, right? If people knew that we as a council, as the county, as the governmental entities, were all had a vision about how we're going to rebuild, how we're going to stabilize first, and then how we're going to start the process of rebuilding so that as many of us as possible, we're bringing along in the process. I think we have, I'm optimistic. We have the potential to make Portland a great city again. Right now, it's just it's sleeping, right? It's on hiatus, right? But when it comes back, will it be a more equitable city? Will it be a city that's more transparent about how we invest our limited dollars? Will it be a city driven by fear or a city driven by partnership and community and neighbors, right? That for me, that's the big question that's unanswered right now. Because the other stuff, yes, it's frightening and it's scary, and it's just compounding the anxiety that people feel. If people knew where we were headed, I think people would have much more confidence. And if people see what I see, which is all the mutual aid, which is all the support that neighbors are giving neighbors, because honestly, governments will never have enough money for all the needs that we are confronted with right now. We have to partner with the broader community, and that's the business community, and that's the grassroots community. We have to partner with everybody because everybody has a role in helping with the recovery, and we can't leave it to, it's not just a downtown recovery, it's a Portland recovery. And we have to collectively recover Portland, because you can't go anywhere in Portland without seeing people who are in severe crisis. And the last thing I will say is, as it relates to gun violence, there are people with severe mental illness on our streets, down to all over the city, honestly, in every part of the city. And no matter who we send as a first responder, we have nowhere to take them. And until we can answer that question, where do you take people who you know in this moment will be a harm to themselves or to someone else? And the answer today is none of the above. We have nowhere to take them. Unity is always full. The hospitals only hold them for 2 hours until they answer the question, are
The
you going to have
hospitals
to
are
help
full.
somebody else? And therefore, and
Yeah,
then with the rise in COVID cases, even that is a iffy,
right,
right?
right.
So I think that's the big thing that no one's working on. And until we get a handle on that, these other problems will continue to be exacerbated. And thanks, Matt, for the update. But
I was gonna say, Commissioner Hardesty, I could talk to you all day. But
we could talk all day.
can I just ask quickly about the response to August 22nd? Because I know that that's something you wanted to do a little more research on.
Yes.
So just while I have you for one more second, I think you're already aware of what happened
I
last.
am very aware. I watched the press conference from my vacations location. I read the press release that happened the day after. I saw the coverage of my community just being terrorized by white supremacists. And I saw the inaction of Portland police. I asked Chief Lavelle in my check-in with him, one of my first check-ins when I came back, about August 22nd. And his response was they had sent 26 officers to East Portland, but 411 officers were on duty. We spent $152,000 in overtime for officers not to respond. My community was terrorized, a community with a high number of English as a second language speakers, communities of color, people who believe the city government doesn't know that they are part of the city of Portland once they get past 82nd Avenue. And it showed on August 22nd. I was fundamentally just crushed at the lack of leadership. I said to Chief Lavelle, what would have happened if you'd had 100 officers take to the street, not riot gear, just 100 officers in uniform walking down the street of 122nd? You think anybody up to no good would have actually still hung out on 122nd? He did not have an answer for that. We
Matt,
must do
anything?
better, and we must not allow white supremacists into our city. Had I been here, I would have recommended that we put all the bridges up, that we inspect cars one at a time, and that any cars that had their license plates covered, any cars with visible weapons would not have been allowed in the city proper. To me, that would have been leadership, not having all hands on deck to do what? Sit in the Justice Center and watch what was happening all day? Yeah, that would have been leadership. What we saw was a lack of leadership that day.
Would you recommend that in the future if those groups decide to
Yes,
come
I
back?
would. Yes, I would. I mean, what we have to do is just not allow access to the city of Portland. And we have to apologize to businesses and individuals that will be unduly impacted. But I think the community would be with us. The community is tired of us sitting on our hands pretending there's nothing we can do.